Good afternoon, everybody. I thought I'd probably better start by introducing myself and my colleague. We've both been carrying out some research with the help of Brass Bands England into holistic well-being in brass band players. Vicky, my colleague, can't be here today. She's on maternity leave at the moment, which is why she's looking rather tired in the picture. And I'm Michael. I've done quite a lot of research into choral singing. My MA is in performance anxiety, and my PhD is in confidence building. And I'm applying that to all sorts of areas of musical and non-musical performance at the moment. One of the things that I think it's worth explaining before I get much further is what is a music psychologist, because that's what I am. I always feel like I should perhaps be announcing that as part of a sort of 12-step program. I'm Michael and I'm a music psychologist. So the way I came to become a music psychologist was I've been a player and a singer and a conductor and a composer. I moved into teaching and workshopping, and as a result of my work as a performer myself, and also helping other people with their performance skills, I became very interested in performance anxiety and musical well-being generally. The next thing that I should address really is what do I think that research can offer to musicians and performers in all sorts of contexts. I think the first thing to say is that sometimes research just seems to prove something that we think we know already. You know, we might feel like it's common sense. But without evidence, the common sense just remains an unproven assumption. And if we want to use things that we think are facts about our experiences and perceptions, the research-based evidence is most useful. Because I come from a performance background myself, my approach to research is always that the practice informs and inspires the research, and then I think it's absolutely essential to extrapolate some strategies and take them back into the practice and apply what we've discovered. So this is partly what I'm going to be talking about today. I expect most of you in the room know more about this than I do. My background is that I was a brass player in my teens. I had a go at playing, I think, everything except a trombone, and decided that my arms were a bit too short for that. Until I fell off my bike the week after I graduated and smacked my teeth in. And so I haven't really played very much at all since. But I am interested in brass banding, and I was very interested to discover that brass bands actually originated for the same kinds of reasons that choral singing did. So as a result of the Industrial Revolution, as people started having regular jobs and regular working hours, and when they were eventually granted a little bit of time off from their work, they had a little bit of spare cash, their bosses started to get worried that they would be on the streets swearing and spitting and fornicating, and decided that it was a good idea to encourage them into some more respectable and improving activities, partly for their spiritual and intellectual nourishment, but also for their well-being and also for social order. So our question really was, what are the current well-being effects of brass band playing? Vicky and I circulated, with the help of Brass Bands England, an online survey, and we got about 400 responses from players. We had 346 usable responses because we only wanted to include adults. But interestingly, we had a lot of younger people who replied as well who were under 18, but we didn't count those in the results. So as part of that research, Vicky and I decided we ought to examine the nature of well-being a little bit as well, perhaps to help us to formulate our questions to the brass band players. And I think the most useful definition is the World Health Organization's definition from 1946, which is that well-being is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the fact that we're not actually ill or suffering at the moment. We should actually be feeling well. And more recently, that's been expanded to include health promotion, resilience and coping skills, and all of the things that fall under the umbrella of self-actualization, which includes feeling as if we're actually achieving our full potential, having some kind of purpose in life and some kind of motivation for getting out of bed in the morning. I think most people who've done any work in education or social work or management are very familiar with this model. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's a hierarchy because actually, all of these factors contribute to our well-being, but it's rather difficult to actually be at the top of the pyramid and feel as if we're actually fully mentally well and self-fulfilled if we can't breathe and we haven't got enough to eat and drink and we don't feel very well. So today, when I'm talking about the results of our research, I won't just be talking about the results that we had under the heading of mental health. I'll be talking about everything and how it actually adds up to holistic well-being or not. So the main question that we asked, we wanted to make sure, actually, that we didn't ask a leading question. So we didn't want to say, what are the benefits of brass band playing? Because we wanted to leave it open so that people could actually report any negative effects as well as positive effects. We found in a lot of the choral research, quite often people asked about benefits. Yesterday I submitted a book chapter for the Oxford University Press that actually discusses all of this material about instrumental ensemble playing and well-being. And my co-author has done a lot of work on choral research, and he's actually been one of the very few people who's asked people about what are the negative things that happen as a result of your singing in choirs, because there are some, as you will see, in brass band playing as well. So we asked an open question, basically, how has brass band playing affected your life in each of these categories? The first three relate directly to that World Health Organization definition: physical, psychological, social. In choral research, that's been expanded to explore emotional and spiritual benefits or otherwise. And then we decided to have an other category. Now, there is a group exercise planned in, but I do know we're running behind, so I'm speaking faster than I'd planned doing. And also, I think I'm going to leave this activity until the end. It'll be something you can do on your way out and perhaps into your next break. But I did want to tell you something about the survey respondents, particularly because all of the Brass Band England members who contributed to our research by filling in the survey were very generous with their time and the number of comments they made and the amount of detail they gave. It was actually quite surprisingly representative, because if you look at how the participants break down in terms of the instruments they play, it's a little bit similar, isn't it, to the makeup of a fairly typical brass ensemble, and that's just by accident. But I was very excited to see that. And in terms of gender, about half and half, which I was pleased about. The 1% are people who didn't want to tell us what gender they were, or there was no response. And there were 2 people out of the 346 who defined themselves as transmasculine. And that was very interesting in itself, actually, and I'll talk about that a little bit when we come to the social aspects. Because for people who perhaps fall into categories such as trans, I think that they were actually saying that playing in a brass band had helped them in both cases to have some support, social support, and certainly in one case to provide the support that their families were unable to provide. The age of the participants in the survey is quite well spread. I was interested to see that the highest number was in the 50 to 60 age group. But I think it's really encouraging to see how many responses we got from younger players and at the very, very extreme as well, from people in their 70s and 80s. So I think the implications for brass banding as an intergenerational activity are really, really important. I thought it was really quite interesting. I'll show you the next one, actually, because I've got a lovely chart here on demographics in general. So the blue are male participants, red female, grey transmasculine. And you can see, again, that actually, in terms of recruitment, and how many female players are joining the brass band world, it's looking quite healthy. The females look like they're overtaking the males in some of the younger categories, and as you'd expect in some of the older categories there are more males, probably from a more traditional background. I did find it quite interesting as well that actually those who didn't want to tell us how old we were, the 33 of the men didn't and 15 of the women, and without wishing to sound at all sexist, I would have expected it to be kind of a little bit the other way around. So I'm not going to be quite as reluctant to ask females what their ages are in future. So before we go any further, I wanted to just say, for each of the sections that I asked about, I'm going to give you a percentage chart so you can see what kind of responses we got. And then in order to honour the contribution that the brass players who took part in the survey have made to this research and the findings, I'm going to present you with a few of the direct quotes. And I should say that actually all of the findings absolutely emerged from the data. We didn't start out with any hypothesis of any kind. So the physical effects, we had 68% of our participants reported positive physical effects, and the negative I will explain in a moment. But before we do anything else, just to kind of engage with the way in which our physical well-being interacts with our mental health, I'd quite like to do a little exercise. There are many ways in which breathing obviously can affect how we're feeling. But I have been reading some research recently, and there's a marvellous YouTube channel program with Dr. Alan Watkins, proving that if we actually regulate our heart rate variability, we experience cognitive improvements, so our minds work more efficiently, and we actually experience less anxiety. Now, as brass players, we expect to be Olympian breathers, obviously, but there's a very simple thing which we can do, which is to actually even out the rate at which we're breathing, and that can really help us with things like performance anxiety, which I'll also be talking about in a few minutes. So what I'd like to do really is, can we just stand up, please, everybody who can? It doesn't matter if you can't, you can do this sitting down. So I'd just like you to stand with your feet about a shoulder width apart and just wiggle your knees and hips a little bit so you feel loose. And imagine you've got a really heavy bucket of water on the end of each arm, just have a little wiggle. That's brilliant. And then just imagine you've got a piece of string connecting you to the ceiling. And I'd just like you to have a big sigh and blow a load of air out. Exactly. Big breath and out. Now, this business of regulating our heart rate variability is achieved by just evening out what we're doing with our inhalation and exhalation. So to start with, I'm going to count, you're going to breathe, okay? I'll try and breathe as well, otherwise I'll die, obviously. But we're going to breathe in to start with for 4, and then just breathe out for 4, and then we'll breathe out for 6, and 6, and 8, and 8. But I'll show you what we're going to do. So have a big sigh and just relax everything. I'm going to breathe in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 6 this time, in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Try 8. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And relax. Do we feel quite calm now? Okay. So one very simple strategy to just kind of use our physiological functions in terms of respiration and slowing down your cardiovascular function to just kind of reduce anxiety a little bit and get you more engaged in the moment. You may sit down now. So the main physical effects that were reported came under the headings of breathing. Well, that's an obvious one, isn't it, for brass players? We know that you develop Olympian lung capacity, breath control, and also people talked about improvements in respiratory conditions. Fitness was an interesting one because people reported general increases in activity, especially if they belong to marching bands. But they also made comments about more specific aspects of fitness, so flexibility, posture, muscle strength. And here are some of the things that people said. So in some cases we had multiple remarks like this. So everybody felt that they were getting a good workout for their lungs. That's fairly obvious. Deep breathing was found to be very helpful and calming in stressful situations to keep people relaxed. The most striking finding, actually, was in the case of the players who had at some point had some kind of respiratory condition, so things like asthma and emphysema and COPD. People were reporting significant improvements in, for example, their peak flow tests. Now, obviously, this is all self-report, and at some point, we're going to go back out and probably come and see you and make you do all sorts of physiological tests. But at the moment, this is what people are saying. And I think it's interesting that somebody who says they're very unfit and overweight comes out as an elite sportsman when they have their breathing monitored, and they're attributing that to their brass playing. In terms of physical activity, as I say, marching bands did report a high level of increased fitness, but people also talked about things like having to get their drums out of the cupboard every week and carry their large instruments around, and basically being more active than they would otherwise, just generally, rather than sitting on the sofa and watching the telly. The negative results, as you saw, there were a few negative results in my figures. One or two were to do with weight, which again I'll talk about a little bit later. Some people felt that if they weren't in a marching band, that actually it was a rather sedentary activity at times, and it took up time when they could be in the gym. But I don't know, I probably wouldn't be in the gym instead of doing music, actually, if it was up to me. But the main finding, actually, in fitness was actually in terms of hearing impairment. So people talked about hearing loss, tinnitus, and recognised that actually maybe they should have owned up earlier and started wearing hearing aids, and maybe start to wear hearing protection. And I think there are some implications here for provision, access to, and taking responsibility for using hearing protection, and that's something, obviously, that we can follow up on. The highest results we got were in the social effects on well-being. And without fail, people were talking about making new friends, increasing their social interaction, meeting a more diverse population. By diverse, they meant usually socioeconomic and also intergenerational contact. And they also felt that they were getting some kind of self-esteem and sense of achievement from their engagement with the local community and the wider community in terms of becoming visible as good musicians, and also fundraising and taking part in public events. And there has been increasing press, obviously, recently on the impact of loneliness and isolation on the mental health of particularly older people. And again, so I've got a couple of quotes about that. So the social effects, 79% of our participants reported positive effects. And the negative effects, it's a shame that there are 6%. But again, it'll become clear where that's coming from in a moment. The most obvious benefit that people had was that they meet up with friends, they make new friends. I'm saying they all the time because I'm talking about my participants. The people in this room may have different things to say, and I'm hoping before the end of this session just to explore that a little bit. But our participants actually valued going to the pub as much as playing, by the look of it, and I can really understand that. And they valued the fact that they would perhaps meet people they didn't have chance to meet otherwise. Negatives could be that we're all having too much fun, really. If we put our banding first, it can cause a bit of strife at home. Quite a lot of our participants use the phrase brass band widows, but I'm sure there are also brass band widowers. The one about the divorce, one divorce and the next one pending, I really wasn't quite sure, actually, whether that was a positive or a negative effect, actually. But I think it's negative. Lots of people were telling us that they met their partners through brass banding, and obviously I think that this one probably meant that they'd met more than one too many, I guess. I don't know. And then, of course, we have a comment about the social culture of beer and curry, which I remember very well from my youth. I think I was bought my first illegal pint in a brass band, and it was all part of my growing up and socialisation. But these are some of the risks that are attached to total immersion in banding if we're not careful. And that's a talking point, I think, for later. I quite like that. Now, nobody actually said they'd been divorced because of the noise they were making with their practice. I think it was more to do with their sort of social excesses. Having said that, we have some really good results on brass bands as support networks. So the words that were used most commonly were teamwork, bonding, belonging, achieving as a team, having a support network. So people were very appreciative of the fact that if you move into a new area, actually all you've got to do to have a social life is go and find another band. Also that the players support each other not only in preparing for contests and concerts, which I'm sure everybody knows about, but also beyond the band room. And bearing in mind some of the problems that were in the previous slide, obviously there are times where personal support can be required as well as musical support. I mentioned a few minutes ago the intergenerational aspects of brass banding and how valuable that can be. I think both ways round for older people to have a chance to continue to interact with younger people and vice versa. But people were sort of saying, actually, maybe their families have played for 3 generations in the same brass band and they feel as if the brass band is their family and that it's a safe place for children to go and learn how to interact with adults who aren't family members. And I thought that was really, really valuable to actually contribute to the children's social development and well-being. And again, reduces that sort of the risk of the social isolation that is such a risk in terms of mental health. Even more striking, this phrase band family was used constantly. And again, from my memories from when I was young, I can really understand that in some cases, if your family is not supportive of you, that actually the brass band can become your family. Quite a lot of people were telling us that they'd met their husbands, girlfriends, wives, boyfriends, other kinds of partners through the brass bands. And also that the brass band might have become their second family or an extension of their family. And again, all the research shows that our family relationships are very, very important in our mental well-being. So we get a very, very positive picture of how brass banding can give us a holistic sense of well-being, which builds our mental health. The question that we asked about emotional effects was not massively widely answered, actually. I think, but 39% of the participants reported some positive effects, and they fell into these 3 categories. So by state, I mean that people were reporting improvements in their mood. So the brass band was actually making them feel happier, regulating their mood. That actually they experienced a wider range of emotions, so highs and lows of rehearsing and performing and taking part in contesting, and also having an opportunity to really express and release their emotions, and perhaps channel their emotions in a positive way. Oops. So the obvious word that everybody kept using was happiness. My guaranteed happy place, several people actually used those very, very words and talked about expressing their emotions. Quite often people were telling us that if they'd had a bad time at work or at home, that they could turn the day into a good one just by going to a rehearsal. And not many people talked about the music specifically, actually. Mainly people talked about getting their feeling of mental well-being from the interactions with the other players and from their self-esteem from the achievements that they made in their playing. But some people did say that they felt that it was very healthy to experience the range of emotions that we feel when we're playing brass band music. Oops, don't want to do that yet. Go back. The negatives on the emotional findings, actually, nobody was saying brass banding makes me miserable or anything quite as direct as that. But because of the pressures and pleasures of contesting, we did get a lot of comments about the highs and lows and what kind of effect that can have on people's emotional lives and psychological states. Both of these quotations relate to contesting. And I know you had a massive discussion about that earlier. So again, there are things to take away from this. Most people actually did say the contesting and the playing helps them to actually experience a huge range of emotions. And there we've got satisfaction, pride, accomplishment, frustration, disappointment, nerves, and elation. But this participant is actually saying, I think it's healthy to experience all of these emotions. So I think that although they were saying that actually we experience a lot of emotion and it can be highs and lows and sometimes distressing as well as uplifting, actually that this is good for our mental health. The only piece of music that was mentioned specifically by anybody, and that's not true, there were two pieces of music that were mentioned specifically in terms of positive effects on people's mental health, specifically in terms of emotional and spiritual benefits, and they were both by Eric Ball, and I'm hoping we might get a bit of this. I don't know. It didn't work last time I did this. Oh, nope. I think you probably all know what an Eric Ball piece sounds like. Oh, here it comes. This is lovely. So keep breathing. So that music was mentioned in both categories of spiritual and emotional well-being and positive effects. The category with the least responses, with the fewest number of responses, was actually in the category of spiritual effects on well-being. Now, that may well reflect the secularization of our society. On the other hand, I did get the impression from some of the answers that maybe some of our players were not exactly sure what we meant by spiritual, really. However, we did get 17% of the people who responded to the survey actually did say that they'd had some kind of positive benefit. And that came into two categories. So the participants reported either experiencing something spiritual through their playing, or being able to express an existing sense of spirituality more clearly through their playing. So some people were saying that they are believers in some kind of religious faith, and that playing could turn into a kind of worship for them and help them to express that side of their lives. But I was very interested by this gentleman who's in his 70s, who said that he's not at all religious, and that to start with, he felt that he wasn't very keen on performing in churches or as part of anything that's a religious ceremony, but he's now recognising that what we do in terms of our brass band playing is fundamentally a celebration of the human spirit. It was very, very thoughtful responses. I have to get on to my favourite responses though now. So we had some negative effect on spiritual well-being. It may have actually increased my atheism, according to one person. Somebody else reported feeling very uncomfortable with some of the settings of brass band playing. And my favourite quote, I've got to read it out because I love it. I hate religion more than I could have ever before, because for some reason brass bands play in churches an awful lot, and vicars don't half talk a lot of bollocks. So I've achieved my ambition because I've used bollocks, and I also used fornication earlier, didn't I, as well? Fabulous. Okay, so finally, psychological effects. So obviously, the psychological effects of playing are all influenced by all of these other categories that I've already been talking about. But we did get a very, very high response rate, I think. 59% of our participants talked at length about the psychological benefits of playing. And I will talk about the 10% as well before I finish today. So the three main categories of psychological effects came under stress, self-actualization, and cognition. So there were an awful lot of people who reported reductions in their stress levels, partly because they were becoming totally absorbed in their music making, and also they felt that it reduced their anxiety. On the other hand, there were some people who reported increased anxiety under some conditions. Self-actualization I felt was very important. So brass band playing giving people a sense of purpose and achievement, which actually gives us the more positive side of contesting, you know, actually feeling as if you're moving forward and making progress, and there is some proof of that. Of course, it can work the other way if you're not. So what could possibly go wrong? Okay, so the main stresses that were reported were dealing with committees and band management, administrative duties, pre-contest stress, disagreements not only amongst players but between players and committee members, some conductor behaviour. I'm a conductor myself, and I've found some similar results in my choral research, that actually some of the problems in terms of musical performance anxiety, for example, can be exacerbated by the way that we behave as conductors. And it was very sad to see that bullying by musical directors or victimisation was mentioned, and harassment. I thought that was quite sad and indicates some training needs. And a bit of a blame culture, which again is connected to the pressures of contesting, I think, and keeping up standards. Performance anxiety played quite a large part. Most of the 10% of the negative responses mentioned performance anxiety of some kind that was mainly related to some of the other stressors. So, you know, it's quite hard to perform confidently if your relationships around you aren't going well. On the other hand, the experience of these stresses and anxieties was largely seen as character building and helping with psychological resilience. So while some people were saying, actually, I avoid solos, for example, or I don't want to play with, top brass bands because I don't want that kind of pressure anymore. A lot of the people who talked about nerves said that the experience of playing in public while you're feeling nervous and realizing that you don't die, and that you can feel dreadful and still perform well, actually has helped them to cope with nerves in a variety of contexts, and has also helped people to feel more confident when they're working under other kinds of pressure. And I think that's a really good selling point, actually, because those resilience skills are very, very transferable. And we had people writing mini essays about giving examples about how they'd managed to transfer these skills into their everyday life. There's not time to talk about this in any detail, but what was very interesting was that there were a large number of people who actually were very honest and open about their own mental health, about whether they'd had histories of depression and anxiety and what their condition was like at the moment. I do feel that the quotation about motivation for living from week to week and day to day, simply it's kept me alive, would be an amazing strapline for BBE. And I found that so inspiring. When I was transcribing these quotations, I read that one out to my wife and she cried. I mean, it's that moving, isn't it? It's very powerful. Cognitive skills were seen to be developed, maintained and improved through brass band playing. Again, older people seem to particularly value this, that it was helping them to maintain their mental acuity and helping them to continue to learn and concentrate. And also they talked about the fact that brass band is so cognitive as well as physically demanding, meaning that actually you can't concentrate on anything else while you're doing it. So it's actually a flow activity. It's one of those things where we can't think about anything else. We get totally absorbed and we lose all sense of self-consciousness. Very, very good for psychological well-being. So my favourite quote from this section, a kind of short mental and emotional holiday. I think we can probably all recognise what's being said there. And many, many people, I don't think anybody actually used the word self-actualisation, but all of the words in these speech bubbles were very, very common throughout the survey. So people saying that it gave them motivation, a sense of purpose, self-esteem, pride in their achievement, feeling as if they were being recognised in the community, as being, brass band players, and also feeling like they were fulfilling some of their musical and personal potential. Now, at the beginning of this, I talked about the Maslow hierarchy of needs. More recently, Martin Seligman has come up with another model of well-being, which is the PERMA model. So for total psychological well-being, Seligman actually said that we need to experience positive emotions, to be engaged in activities, to have good social relationships and support networks, to feel that our life has meaning and that we're achieving something. And I think that even though I've only been able to kind of skate through very quickly what we found in our survey, I think that actually brass band playing can provide some benefits in all of those categories. There's a really quick summary of some of the transferable skills. I think the most important one for me, I think, is psychological resilience and the fact that actually we learn to deal with success and failure and highs and lows. But the sense of belonging to your band family, very, very important, as well as all the physical and psychological benefits. So I think my main message today really is brass banding has got such a lot going for it in terms of not just mental well-being, but holistic well-being, that I think we need to start shouting about it. I think that maybe my research has proven what you all maybe think, but you've now got some evidence for it, that brass banding is good for our health. But we've also found that there are a few areas to work on. So maybe, again, we're running out of time, aren't we, Alex, because we've been running late today. But these are a few things that I'd like people to go away and think about. So if brass band playing is so good for us, firstly, why isn't everybody doing it? And secondly, how can we make the most of that, you know? So how can we let everybody know it's good for us? How can we encourage different communities to participate? So relating back to Sophie's session on diversity this morning, and how could we use these research findings for recruitment to ensure that brass band playing continues in this healthy way? I think also, very, very importantly, now we have some wellbeing evidence, it's there to be used in funding bids, isn't it? And on the negative side, on the side of the negative findings, what training needs do we think that this research has identified for our players and conductors and possibly management? I think there are a lot of strategies and applications that we can extrapolate from this. And it's something to be talking about, I think, moving forward. I'm very sorry we've had to cut group discussions, really, but we can carry that forward later, can't we, Alex? So my basic recommendations are to use this evidence to move forward in all the ways that I know that most music making groups need to. We all need funding, no matter what we're doing. There's always a need for recruitment and future-proofing and lobbying advocacy for all of our musical activities. And also using the findings to support areas of training and development. So at the risk of looking like I'm selling my own services, which I kind of am, you know, is it possible that some of the bands might find it useful for somebody like me to come along and do some performance anxiety workshops or some team building workshops and helping players to identify the skills that they are acquiring through brass band playing and to value that. So for the future, we are planning to do more research. Obviously, a survey of this nature was qualitative. It was all based on self-report, but very, very powerful. I think when we talk about how people feel and we're talking about mental health, numbers can be useful, but I think words can be very, very, very strong. And actually to get the perceptions and feelings of the players and the participants is, for me, a priority. So moving forward, I would be planning to carry out some interviews, perhaps some focus groups with people who are involved in banding right now, and maybe to use some formal mental well-being scales, and that just means, again, a questionnaire. Finally, I think because physiological well-being and psychological well-being are so intertwined, I think it's very important to start to carry out some physiological well-being measures. So in choral research, researchers have done things like checking people's pain thresholds before singing and after. I thought you might enjoy that. so we'd do a blood pressure cuff, resistance test before you play, and then another one after, and see how much pain you can bear before and after. Or the cold water test, of course. I think Michael Mosley famously got people to stick their hands in buckets of ice water, didn't they? And to see if swearing helped. So I think brass banding might be more constructive. And my colleague Gunter Kreutz, that I've just written a book chapter with on this research, has done some excellent work in choral research that I'd like to emulate, and that is harmless, it's non-invasive. It would involve people spitting into a test tube before they have a brass band rehearsal or performance, and then doing the same thing again after, and then we can measure some of the endocrinological and immunological changes that might have taken place. And again, I think these will be very, very powerful tools in your recruitment and funding applications. If you want to know more, our scientific paper based on this research has been published in an open access journal, which is online, and Alex has some copies of that and also some information about other areas in which we've been releasing and discussing some of these findings. And My email address is up there. If you want to get in touch with me to find out more about this, please do. You also have some pieces of paper, I think, little forms on which you could indicate a willingness to take part in further research if you're interested. There's absolutely no pressure to do this, but it would be really nice to have a few people that I can get in touch with when we're ready to move on to the more empirical stage of the research, and hopefully we'll have some findings that will be very useful to you all. I think that's it. Thank you very much. Okay.